Thank you. My name is Kevin Simpson, founder of ALOC, or the Association of International Educators and Leaders of Color. We are ecstatic today to have our guest to share his story on a very dear topic to him and to many. And thank you, Juan, for also controlling the opening slides. And as we get started, we'll go to the next slide. As we get started, we definitely want to take a pause um, with everything that is going on around the world, literally around the world, from Ukraine, Russia, Sudan, Israel, Palestine. We want to pause and acknowledge the human cost and humanity in conflict that is going on. And ultimately, we know that our goal is to strive for peace in all situations. We know that we have families, teachers, staff, students who are impacted with all that's going on. And we want to just make sure that we acknowledge that and we say that we encourage students to provide resources and support through teachers, through counselors, no matter what's going on, to make sure that students know that we as adults are aware, we acknowledge, and we know that we want to make sure that we hold space for them in all situations. So we'll just pause for a moment as it relates to just the world and world affairs that are going on. So just take a pause. Thank you all for that. We'll go to the next slide. And at ALOC, as we always do, and we know for us, it's beyond land acknowledgement in the same form of fashion. It's beyond taking a pause for silence. It's thinking about what are we doing? What's our role in any of these situations, and making sure that um, we know that statements can become performative if we're taking no action connected to the statement. And for us, I acknowledge that I'm based in Dallas, Texas, which is on stolen land. It's the land of the Caddo, the Kickapoo, the Comanche, the Wichita, um, and the Caddo. And I honor the land with gratitude, and that no matter where we are at in our situations, where we work, where we play, where we live, that we also are learners of the land, learners of the First Nations, those who identify as indigenous in our populations, and ensure that we're thinking about ways to indigenize our community, those voices, and making sure they have a part and a role um, consistently out the learning process that we're engaging our scholars in, and making sure that we know that indigenous people still exist, they are still here, and they are worthy of celebrating. And so we just take a moment just to say that. We have a document called Beyond Land Acknowledgement, which states what we do beyond just a statement. Next slide. All right, a little bit about us. We're ALOC and devoted to amplifying the work of international educators and leaders of color, focus on our big three, which is advocacy, learning, and research. Next slide. All right. Again, we are excited to jump into today's session with Juan Sheblak. He's an experienced middle school assistant principal with a passion for education. He's with 8 years experience in administration, 13 years in the classroom. Juan has a unique background that shapes his approach to leadership. He's committed to student-centered learning and upholding the value of personalized, differentiated, authentic, and inspired teaching and learning. And I can say Juan is a giant when it comes to student voice, when it comes to teachers. He's a champion. It's always ecstatic to connect with him and hear the work that he's doing as a BIPOC leader and international educator in international schools, combining experience of his anti-apartheid activism and provide a unique perspective on issues related to diversity, equity, inclusion, from struggles and triumphs of the anti-apartheid movement can inspire all to become agents of change in their own communities. It's important to acknowledge that while the contexts are different, the principles of equity, diversity, and justice remain constant. By embracing this intersectionality, we can create a more inclusive, diverse, and equitable environment for all members of the school community. With that, I will turn it over to Juan. Thank you, Juan. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Kevin. And I want to acknowledge Kevin and ALOC and the whole team for providing the platform by which we can tell our narrative, share our narratives, and allow for us to be able to engage with each other in terms of our narratives. So, and also to acknowledge everybody who has played a part of my journey as I sit here, to acknowledge that those people, I'm sitting here because of those people. So thank you for that. As we go through October, there are a few more kind of ALOC webinars that you can join and register for. So please go to the ALOC link tree, I think, the link, and it's just an amazing array of people sharing their knowledge, sharing their experiences by which we are able to identify, to live within and just be a part of it. It is a unique experience. Thank you, Kevin, for starting this and finding this. Is that, I think I'm, right. Is that it?
Yeah, that's it. That's a close.
Okay. So I'm gonna start off my presentation, and the way I want to present it is that I don't have many breakout groups as such. But what we do want to follow is that you can ask any questions. So just raise your hands, or I'll give some pauses in between, in terms of having time to reflect and just engage in terms of the conversation that we're having. So this is the conversation more than me just talking in terms of that. So, when I started the idea of looking at how do BIPOC leaders rise above adversity and lead to resilience, I landed on this concept of resilience. And I really wanted to explore what resilience means. And so often we perceive resilience as being able to have a shield in terms of being able to deflect things and not bother those things. And that for me was something that I genuinely had to reflect on in terms of resilience. And so when I look at community, and as when I say we are not vulnerable, I mean that we are powerful as a community, and that struggle is real, and that struggles help us to create an identity. And because the system is not aligned to us, that's where the problem lies. And so we really want to focus and look at that and see how does it work. Vulnerability does not mean weak at all. And I think often there's a perception out there that when we talk about vulnerability, we mean weak. As a community, we are not. Where we are not. As our voices develop and our identity come together, we are not vulnerable in that context. And so, once again, when you look at resilience and how it's defined, it looks at stresses, right? It looks at the process of adapting to trauma or to tragedy or to threats in terms of that. We also know that resilience is important to help us develop our kind of like capacity to be able to deal with certain things in the workplace and our mental health. And though I want to add also that the buzzword of resilience is not a tool by which I can say, hey, if you have enough tools, you can deal with racism. Because that's the tendency that's happening in a lot of corporations when they talk about resilient workshops and resilient training, as this, if I give you enough tools, you can deal with it. that does not deal with the systematic issues and problems that we have. And so I grew up during a part of thinking that I need to be resilient. I need to fight this and have this fighting spirit in terms of that. And yes, that was important, but at the same time, resilience was able for me individually to be able to handle what comes my way. And also, it doesn't say that the system is okay, or it justifies the system or the people engaging in that system of oppression. So resilience does not, and our resilience, it does not address marginalization. Marginalization is marginalization, and that is the system. And so we ask ourselves, in terms of the marginalization part, is that what are the systems in place that we talk about when we talk about marginalization? I had a conversation with somebody who asked me, why do I use the word marginalization? And because they felt that the school and the way the school developed systems, that it wasn't intentional, because marginalization meant oppression. And so, that person felt that, but we're not intentional in terms of our system. So we're not marginalizing anybody, we're not oppressing anybody. And the question I posed was, if you look at the marginalized communities, have they been included in developing those systems? Because if they're not, the mere fact that that's happening means that you are marginalizing people. The centering voices of the marginalized communities and students and people need to be part of the system. And so when you look at school systems, the reality is school systems, especially international school systems, they develop for white Western students. That's right. And so we look at our student handbook, and we look at our different, the way we deal with consequences and behavior. It's very Western centric, and it's very, unfortunately, white centric. And so we talk about a diverse school, we talk about diverse individuals and institutions. And so we ask the question, though, is that how are those people or those communities reflected in just your student handbook? As something as fundamental to the learning, is that how are those voices centered within that? So that for me, what I look at is that we need to reclaim resilience. We have to reclaim resilience. I believe that as a community, as a people, we need to reclaim resilience. And what does that look like? We need to look at what the marginalized, who are the marginalized, and how. And what do we do as a community? I'm going to pause for 30 seconds. And if there's any questions, please feel free just to shout it out. Okay, so just FYI, I was a monk for 5 years, so I'm quite comfortable with silence. It's nothing new to me in terms of that. When we talk about reclaiming resilience, I really, telling your narrative and telling your story is so important, because your story has power. And you have to fundamentally believe that your story has power and your story has value. I think that often we tend to shy away from our stories. We tend to make our stories smaller than what it is, and we minimize our stories, for lack of a better word. And so you have to own your narrative. You have come through a journey, you have journeyed, and you have faced so many obstacles, and reflecting on that. And so our story is a story of struggle. I don't think that, well, I don't know of any person of color who has turned around and said, my life has been so easy, everything has been a smooth ride in terms of that. I know that my story is a story of struggle. My story is a story of growing up and at the age of 14 realizing that the societal structures are not equal, not being able to go to another place in your own city. You had to stay in your community and your own suburb. You had to go to specific school. You couldn't, there was no integration. And that was at the age of 14. And then being part of the anti-apartheid movement, realizing that, and that's a story itself. There were times when I was arrested, interrogated for subversive activities against the government. That story has value. Being a gay person and a gay man and having a family, that has a story in itself. I found out for me that when I stood up and told my story and able to tell my story, students identified with what I was saying. And that's a huge difference in the community. It wasn't an intellectual activity. It wasn't a what if activity. It wasn't a kind of just a esoterical discussion or philosophical discussion. This is my experience. And telling my story has allowed students to really feel that there's a realness to their life. Students from the queer community feel that, oh, that he represents me. Students from the person of color community, they would identify with me and my struggle in terms of that. So owning your narrative and embrace it and celebrate it. That word struggle, we need to be careful. It's not sadness. I don't believe it's sadness. Struggle is really reflecting on your journey and acknowledging what you've overcome to be where you are at. And yes, acknowledging also there's still a lot more to do, but celebrate where you are. As you sit where you are right now, you have to celebrate where you are in that space, because you've gone through a journey, you've gone through a process, you had a story to reflect on. The other part for me that I find, and this is really important, systems of support. Wherever you are, please have a system of support. Have people you can talk to, have people you can engage with, right? So you can, I find keeping contact with family is really important. And at the same time, as a BIPOC leader, I'm going to be honest, it's hard finding other leaders who are of color that you can talk to at times because we are so few, right? And our journeys are different. And this is honestly, it's not a judgment or a value statement. Talking to a person who isn't from the queer community or a person who isn't of color, it's hard to have a conversation in terms of understanding, because for me, what I bring is so layered in terms of who I am, right? And so I'm a non-Westerner for one. I come from South Africa. I have a very different thinking. I don't have a linear thinking. I'm not linear in my thinking. I have a non-linear process. I'm relationship-based. And so that is often incongruent with a lot of Western institutions that we have. We like to have the aspect of everything is linear, everything is task-orientated. How well can you complete a task? And that's important. But at the same time, I am like, what's the impact? What's the impact of the task? What do we have to do? How do we do it? So that's very different. And understanding that that's who I am, and finding a voice, a space, and a place where I can express that. I find that family and then people who can relate to my experience that I can talk to and reach out. So finding that space in terms of support is important. part of, oh, sorry, any questions or any comments?
Yeah, if I may, I think you made a very great point about sometimes feeling like you're in a silo. And depending on where you are in the world, family may not be easily accessible when you are going through those moments of frustration, anger, or just overall despair, because it seems so insurmountable, and you may be one representative of the BIPOC population within your school. So having that immediate kind of release, if you will, is quite challenging. And I'm just curious, like, we talk about resiliency, but you know, how do you maintain that when you feel like everything else is just mounting up? It's tough, and then you have to maintain a smile or an open disposition while you're dealing with all this racism or people's judgments. I don't know. I think a lot of us know a lot of this, like from a philosophical level. I think, at least for me, it's more so, what can we do in those moments when we feel like our back is against the wall?
Okay, so I mean, I to be honest with you, I don't have all the answers, and I can tell you, for me, part of my process that I go through is really looking at my back is against the wall. This feels insurmountable, but if you reflect, I reflect generally on my story and where I am and why I am here, right? And so you look at the holistic part of who you are as a person and your journey, and you position that aspect of what you're feeling right now, when you position in the whole of your story, you find that it's not as insurmountable as you think it is at times. That's for me, and that really works for me in terms of that. I really have to take time to step back and reflect. And if someone says to me that someone makes a comment, an assumption about my ability at work, and doesn't necessarily take doesn't take into context my culture or who I am or my history, right? And so that's really frustrating for me, because if you have asked me to come on board as a BIPOC leader, I would assume that you are ready for me as a BIPOC leader, and that you have created a cultural competency to include me in things. That is not always the case. And at the same time, I look at, and just for me, I look at fighting apartheid, and I look at what I've done in my life to dismantle that systematic and racist system as a country, and I put that time and space where that is really like annoying for me, or I'm really hurt by it, or I'm angered by it, and the one is always bigger than the other one, right? So your journey of where you're at and who you are is way bigger than that one instance. Now, I'm not saying don't address the instance. What I am saying is that put that experience in perspective of your life's journey. And you then draw, I believe that I draw from that experience and be able to position the way I think about something. Does that make sense? Right? Because, yeah, because, and I just say, when you own your narrative, look at it from that point, look at it from where you are. You're sitting right now in a place, and you have come a long way in terms of that. And so that moment in time is frustrating. I totally get it. And I understand the feeling of back against the wall in terms of that. And sometimes I think one of the biggest aspects is being the lone voice. That is really frustrating. That lone voice is really hard. And so for me, I have people that I can pick up the call, I can pick up a call, I can video, I can Skype, I can Zoom with, I can do all that to help me process, because I am a visual and verbal processor. Right. And so I don't always have necessarily people like family, but I do have friends and people who understand me that I can, and that's what I mean by growing your network and supporting that. Any other questions?
Can I just add to what Juan was saying? Hi, Juan. Hi, everybody. In addition to what Juan was saying, I found that if you don't have, your people close by, and sometimes your family might not necessarily understand what's happening, what I found helpful in the past is to have a coach. Find a coach who will help you, to give you the tools that you need to process or to handle whatever it is you're going through, because chances are whatever is happening is going to happen again. So if you have a coach, is also somebody who's objective, who'll be able to ask you the right questions, and you come up with your own solutions. And once you've got, a couple sessions, you gain confidence and you realize that you're not the only one who's going through that as well. So I think what I found is really just the tools to deal with whatever situation, just step back, as Juan said, think about your own story, but then at the same time, develop or cultivate some tools to deal with these types of situations, which will always happen. It's not going to be a one-off thing. It's going to keep coming back. And once you have the tools and the experience, you gain your confidence and you realize it's just another thing and you just move on. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Desiree. And so I'm actually trying to figure out how to go back, to my presentation, because I missed out on, let me just see if I can do something. There we go, got it. Okay, so when, nope, not that one. Oh, so the other aspect is systems of power. We all continuously deal with this, and we know that. In recent time, I have really kind of and I've struggled personally with it, and I'm still struggling with it, is that I find that sometimes that schools see organizational fit as assimilation. We kind of sometimes talk about diversity and differences in thinking, but I sometimes struggle to see how that works. And so to be really clear about cultural fit or best fit is not assimilation. And to address that. And even before you go, for me, when I interview, I ask these questions. Right? You gotta say in an interview, I ask very clear, I am a person of color who belongs to the queer community, who is non-Western. Is your school ready for this? Have your school reflected on that? You, as a person of color, need to ask those questions to your organization that you want to join. Right? Because what ends up happening is that we tend, I think the general view is teamwork is seen as about being the same, and it's not for us. Right? We have a different way of thinking. Our experience tells us differently. And so just be clear about that and asking that question when you join an organization. And we know that the word best fit is something that we really need to address in our interview processes, because best fit is a very loaded question for a person of color. And we hear that often spoken. I don't think it's not the intention. But as a person of color, I wonder when people talk about best fit, what do they mean by that? And what does that best fit look like? Right? And so a suggestion would also be that if people do talk about best fit is to ask people, what does best fit look like and how do I achieve it? Right? Because like have that clear conversations in terms of that. So here we go. This has been something that for me, I have been reflecting a lot over the past few years since I entered international schools. And it's something that I continuously reflect on, is that I am different and I don't claim to be anything else. And at the same time, I have to acknowledge that I don't want to lose myself in the process of being in an international school. And I think I think sometimes we adapt to do that. And I wonder how, like, what do you sacrifice in terms of doing that? And that's a question for me I have asked myself, is that, do I sound white enough to fit in when I do an assembly? Do I sound, will the white people understand me if I'm sitting at a leadership table? And I've made peace with, I will not lose who I am as a person. I don't mind navigating white spaces, but I'm still going to remain who I am as a person. And that can be hard for a lot of people because we are taught from an early age to code switch so easily. And then we wonder sometimes, like, why do we end up where we are and how do we lose ourselves in terms of that? So your identity, your narrative, your support structure helps you to center yourself in terms of who you are in the process throughout your experience. So it's not one or the other. It's not only one part. It's a culminating event, kind of like looking at all those and navigating, and it can be tiring. I know, and I understand, because you continuously working again. You continuously working within a system that's not necessarily set up for you as a person, and where you come from. So, do we have any questions, or insights, or comments? So just part of the other part I want to say is when we talk about our life experiences, it's interesting for me when I look at my life experiences, and I remember being 14 years old and being arrested and not knowing where I was and what's going to happen to me and everything else, and not knowing if I'm going to see my parents. And that really centered for me in terms of, when I look back at that centered for me in terms of when I look at stuff right now, sometimes what's significant and what's important, and what the weighting is in terms of that. And then looking at a post-apartheid South Africa, when we were part of the transition in terms of that healing aspect, that I think that and I don't know if you'll ever have it, but I think a required aspect on a DIJ journey of any international school needs to be the acknowledgement of past hurts, whether intentional or unintentional. We need institutions need to acknowledge that. And I question and I ponder the rush into doing DIJ work without reflecting on past hurts. And so how does the healing begin when we don't address the past hurts? And South Africa, whether right or wrong, whether effective or not, we had something called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where people who supported the apartheid government and who, for lack of a better word, like killed and tortured people during that period had to appear to the people that they've hurt, and the families and the members that they took away from their families. They had to publicly talk about that to the families and explain to them what happened, because without that acknowledgement, healing would have been taken a lot longer in terms of that. So, DA Joburg is not just about let's get the statement sorted out. It's got to start with acknowledging the hurts and the past, and how do we move from there. And you might get people say, but we weren't a part of that. Whether we were a part of that or not, the fact that all institutions have past hurts, and as current people, we need to acknowledge, and current institutions and head of schools need to acknowledge that, and then say, how do we move forward from there? Questions?
I was just wondering, as you spoke about repairing harm, and whether or not you are aware of any specific protocols or routines that organizations can use to navigate some of those conversations, either amongst students and or between colleagues. Because I think if you're going to be working with certain people within your institution for even a short or long term period of time, then at least the person who was harmed, I think that would be difficult to know how to navigate that when you feel like that person doesn't mean you well, at least within that moment, but also for the perpetrator, if you will, like how to educate them so that they could begin the work that they need to do to ensure that the victim, feels appeased to a certain degree, and also how to move forward. Idrizo. Yeah, so I'm just wondering if you know of any protocol. Sorry, I'm not.
No, that's fine. So, there's things such as listening circles, which are really, for me, a powerful tool in terms of bringing voices and centering voices in terms of that. With regards to for lack of a better word, the person who how do I put it in a who does harm, for example, in terms of that. To be honest with you, it is their responsibility and the organization's responsibility to create a framework for their response and how they can approach that. I would caution that it's your responsibility, because then you are taking on board a systematic institutional wrong and trying to rectify it. When you look at your sphere of control, that's not necessarily where that lies, right? Where your sphere of control lies in terms of that. And so reporting that and creating listening circles to gather data and to talk about it, to make it visible, I think that's really important for us as people of color, and for people to hear our experiences. And it's a responsibility of leadership and the organization to develop a framework that will help you address that. And so that's a really interesting question, because sometimes there's this concept of we need to hire diverse candidates. Wonderful, excellent. It's about how do we retain diverse candidates? How do we allow you to feel belong in the community? It's not just getting you on campus and going, okay, here you go. No, it's way more than that. And so the question I do have, and I process at the moment, is that how do we take care of people from diverse cultural backgrounds once they're on our campus? or do we normatively try to create white standards by which we want them to operate? Which is a, like, right? I have delved into the concept of bias performance reviews. It's something that I'm working on in terms of that. Is that what language do we use? Why do we use that specific language? So how do we retain you in our community and make you feel and intentionally, right? Not by accident, not like, oh, we have other people of color, so therefore you belong. How do we intentionally help you belong and retain you within the organization and the community? And I don't have an answer to that. You know, it's something that I think we continue to work upon, but it's something that we need to ask as candidates who are interviewing for international communities during our recruitment process. We should reflect and ask those questions from the organization and the community we want to join. Any other comments or questions? So that wraps up where we are. I thank you so much for listening to me. I think I've spoken too much. I do apologize for that. But I hope also that you walk away with kind of for me, it's important that I tell my story and my narrative as a leader. There are very few of us, but also be real about the struggles that we face. I think as BIPOC leaders, we tend not to want to talk about it because we're scared about what other people are going to think. And we need to be clear that we have struggles as BIPOC leaders, and we have a community that we're looking at how to address it, and that all of us, we're not alone. Whether leader, teacher, or teacher leader, or student, we're not alone. We are a community.
Right. Let's get some virtual love to Juan. Thank you, Juan, so much for, again, one, being a leader, being in that space, but also being able to acknowledge that, you know, there are some things that go on as a leader as you move up in the realm of leadership in the international school ecosystem that you will face. And again, I think it's, you know, for us, it's not a, you know, it's having those systems in place. It's having protocols in place. It's being aware of that things are going to happen. You're going to have community members. You're going to have board members. You're going to have parents. You're going to have students. You're going to encounter things, you know. And there's some stuff that people have encountered and people do not share, you know, and that, you know, and we acknowledge that. I acknowledge those people. A talk I recently recorded, you know, talked about people who have left our ecosystem because they have faced different situations and scenarios that they have not shared, or they've shared in secret, and they've not been comfortable sharing, you know, things that they've encountered. And so I thank you for, again, this look and this consideration of resilience and this keep going, and that it is possible. And but also to say that A word that you said, which I feel is big. It's about the A word, acknowledging where schools have been. So we always say, look at the history of your international school. Look at the leadership, who has historically been in the leadership seat, who have historically been the board president, the leaders of the board. Does that makeup match your context? How does that match the global majority? Are their voices there? Are they centered? Have they been erased? When we talk about inclusion, again, it's not a lot of schools jump. I want to talk about inclusion. Well, let's talk about exclusion. You know, we can't just hop in and say we're inclusive, but has that been the history of the context? Let's really unpack, you know, who we have been, where we are, but also who we want to become. This week was one of the intentions I talked around with some math leaders in Green Bay, Wisconsin, was like, who do you want to become as it relates to this work? You know, we know the situation, we know the scenario, we look at the data, it's in front of us, can't hide. Now that we know that, who do we want to become? What's our role? What do we want to learn? And so I think you, again, your voice and your presence, but others, if there's any comments, anything you want to bestow upon Juan, anything you want to add in the space before we close, the virtual floor is yours, as we like to say. Thank you for the comments. Thanks, Maki, Hansen. Thanks, Kamisa, Desiree, fellow, Aiko. Thank you all. Thanks, Evelyn. Thanks, Meredith. Thanks, Benjamin. Anything else you want to say?
I really appreciate this platform. It has so much value to add in terms of who we are, and as a community, it's been a lifeline for me, to be honest with you. And I appreciate the different opinions, but also that we're very clear of our struggle. Kevin, we can easily get sucked into the minutiae of things to appease other people. And I have to admit that I look at ALAC and I look at the practitioners that we have, and it's been a very clear course that we are following. And the struggle will continue, but we're not going to give up that struggle to make other people feel comfortable. And that's something that's really inspiring.
Thank you, Juan. Thanks, Meredith. Love that comment. Meredith said, if you ever get a chance to work with Juan, do. He is such a wonderful leader. I love that. Kudos. All about giving those flowers. All about flower giving. Well, all right, folks. So there's nothing else. We appreciate you for coming into the space. We thank you so much. Be on the lookout. We have more webinars coming. We have an entire series, some that we've shared, some we've not shared, that are coming throughout this 2023-2024 academic year. Join us. We have our virtual conference on 5th of November coming up. We're excited about, and then we are live and in person and at UNIS in Hanoi, Vietnam at the end of January. We're getting ready for, as well as we're also planning for 2025. People just don't know that. That's going to be coming as well. So we appreciate you for showing up. We appreciate all that you do, and know that, again, reach out to us in terms of programs, ideas, and spaces. And we thank you.